Let's just scooch on closer to my screen here. All right, you guys. Hello, 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 you guys. Welcome to a brand new episode of Hot Topics. My name is Gabrielle. Let me tell you what this show is about. This is the show where we like to have real talk about real things. We like to talk about things in education, what else? Employment, empowerment. We've done topics about our robots taking our jobs. We've done plenty of topics about homeschooling. We've done plenty of topics about ADHD, right? So we like to focus on those things as we are sponsored by, not sponsored, as we are under my company, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So our goal is, while we take a variety of different topics, our goal is to educate you, right? So our goal is for you to learn. Our goal is for you to gain knowledge in multiple ways. And there's so many ways that you can gain knowledge. And today is no different. I am looking forward to today because not only do I have a brand new guest to the hot seat, but I have a repeat topic. And let me tell you what that repeat topic is. So, that repeat topic is study abroad. So, this is our third installment of Study Abroad. I am particularly excited about this topic. And I know I say that in every show, but I am excited about this topic because I myself have studied abroad in Italy while I was in college. And this is a great opportunity for me to, I don't want to say like share war stories, but maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll, we'll hash it out and we'll share some stories, but definitely discussing our experiences. And it's, and to be able to talk to someone about their experience actually going to another country to take classes. Because usually when we travel to various countries, it's usually like a few weeks, right? So 1 week, 2 week, 3 weeks. So we're talking, when it comes to studying abroad, it is at least at minimum 3 months, right? So when you're in another country for a long period of time, you pick up habits, you have to change, your circadian rhythm, you have to learn new cultures and all that stuff. So, there's a lot that goes into studying abroad. And if you're watching this right now, or you're listening to this right now, and maybe your child wants to study abroad, or you want to, and you're looking for some inspiration, so hopefully this episode will be that inspiration for you. Let me tell you who my guest is, who's going to sit on the hot seat. Her name is Sarah Gallup. And let me tell you, she is a licensed psychologist at a forensic state hospital, and she is the host of a brand new podcast, which is her own podcast called Behind the Walls of the World's Psychiatric Hospital. We'll reference that at the end of the show, but I wanted to shout that out there. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring her to the stage. Hi, Sarah. How are you doing
Hi,
today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am good. I'm good. Welcome to Hot Topics.
Yeah,
Welcome to the hot seats. We're going to be talking about studying abroad. So, let's get right into it. All
let's.
right. So, you studied abroad in France, right?
I
So,
did, yes.
please, I'm just going to have you dive right into it. So, tell us about your experience.
Sure. So I studied abroad in Poitiers, France in the 2004-2005 school year. And I was there for the full academic year. I studied and took courses at the university in Poitiers. I took classes with French students, so some of the regular classes, as well as classes in what's called the Centre Français Langue Étrangère, which is the French as a foreign language school. So I was with students from all around the world and had a really great time. I lived with two host families. I made lots of friends, some friends from around the world that I'm still in contact with, which is really cool. And overall, it was just a fantastic experience. Would let's see, how much? What would you like me to go into detail about?
All right. Well, let's nitpick at that.
Yeah,
Let's nitpick. All right. So why France out of all the countries in the world? Why
sure.
France?
So I went to college to specifically to study French. I had originally wanted to be a French professor, and there was something about the language from a really young age that just kind of appealed to me. And so when I got to high school, I knew I wanted to study French, and that I was able in high school to go visit France during a spring break trip, which was really cool. Absolutely fell in love with the country, knew I wanted to go back. And so when I got to college, part of the requirements of doing a French major was studying abroad. And so we had the option at my school of doing either a semester abroad or the full academic year. And I knew that I wanted the most um, authentic experience that I could get. I wanted to really improve my language skills and wanted to just really experience the culture as fully and completely as I could. And so I chose the year long option, and I chose to live with host families so that I was constantly practicing my language and really getting an authentic sense of what the culture was like, what people in the culture were like, and really feeling like I was fully immersed in French culture.
Awesome, awesome.
Yeah.
So now, so in the previous two installments that
Hmm.
I did, and even my own experience, what I find that people tend to study abroad because of a language,
Hmm.
right? So, I went to Italy because I was studying Italian in high school and in college. Um, the previous two people, the first guest went because she was speaking French or learning
Hmm.
French rather. The second one was learning Chinese. So I'm noticing a theme in that,
Hmm.
it's because of languages that
Hmm.
people choose to study abroad. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense to me. I'm from Oregon, and in Oregon, there are very few opportunities to speak French. And so I knew that I was going to have to get out of my school, get out of my usual circumstances in order to be able to become more proficient and fluent in the language. And so I knew that study abroad was going to be the best way to do that. I really got the sense that I was improving my language even at the airport on my way over there, because I remember just waiting at the gate from wherever my layover was to Paris. All of a sudden, there were people speaking French all around me. And I remember I had this sort of long lasting thought that lasted most of the year, where I kept thinking, well, they're probably speaking English when I'm not around. And it was such a silly thought. And I thought, well, of course not. That's not the case. They're speaking, they're French. They speak French all of the time. And yet I had this idea that somehow it was like this conspiracy around me. Anyway, it was great because I was able to use my French from the moment I got there, navigating around the airport, navigating my way to the trains, navigating my way around the city until I met up with my host family. And so it really was a very immersive experience for me, and the language was really what drew me, but the culture is what kept me there. It was fun, and I really felt like my language skills improved a lot over the year that I was there.
I would imagine so because
Hmm.
um you didn't really, especially staying with a host family. I imagine there wasn't a lot of opportunity for you to speak English. So was it like you were forced to speak French?
We were, yeah, essentially, when I was in the host family, obviously I was going to be speaking French. I and I kind of giggle because there were about 15 or 20 of us from Oregon who went to the same school and studied. And so we had a lot of the same classes together. We spent a lot of time together. And so it was easy between classes or in our spare time to default back into English. by the end of the year, we started speaking this sort of hybrid language of French and English, where we use whatever came to our mind first, or whatever was shortest or easiest. Uh, and so there are a lot of sort of it sort of became our own sort of Creole language in a way, where it was, this sort of hybrid of uh, well, what did we call it? Franglais, French and English.
Oh my God. So did was there like a was there like a change in how do I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question.
Mm-hmm.
So like the way that I learned Italian was very like broken down by like conjugations and um like the it was formed in a way it was like for someone that didn't know the
Mm-hmm.
language and it had for like you had to learn in a way that it had to be taught like in a
Yeah,
textbook and
very
then when you
textbook.
actually yeah and then when you like when I actually got to to Italy it was like whoa this is not how I learned it in school right because there's a lot of
Exactly.
slang and it so
Yeah.
did you have that experience?
100%. Yes. So we have the textbook language, the proper way of speaking. And then I got there and I realized, oh, people don't always speak like that in everyday speech. A big one that I noticed, or a big change that I noticed, was in questions and the way that questions were formed. So I'm trying to give an example. In textbook French, we would have learned qu'est-ce que c'est? What is that? And then when I got to French or to France, they would say c'est quoi? Just as the inverse of asking the question. And that was a really uh how do I want to say, it required me to be very flexible in the way that I interacted with people. And I realized, oh, in most colloquial speaking, people don't speak like the way that I learned in the textbook. It was, it's this other way. And then in one of my host families, I had my host mother was very proper. She was a very proper French woman. And I had a little host brother who was 9. And of course, he would use 9-year-old slang, and she would correct him. C'est pas quoi, c'est comment. Not what, it's what. And so that was really interesting to be able to learn uh, proper French as well as what most people speak throughout the day.
Yeah, yeah. And then did you and then myself as well, did you were you because I think was like I was thinking in English, so I was trying
Mm-hmm.
to like translate it into Italian. So were there things in English that you were trying to think about, like how do you say it in French?
Mm-hmm. Yes, especially at the beginning of my year there, I kept thinking, okay, this is how do I directly translate it? What's the word in French for blah 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 blah? And then it kind of dawned on me that I was like, I have to get out of this mentality, and this doesn't, this word in French is the word in French, and to kind of think about it on its own and not try to translate everything, because that took twice as much time. And so once I had this shift in my mind of like, um, trying to think of an example, université, university was not, not translating it back into English, but to just think about it as that's what it is. If that makes sense. I had to think about it without translating, and then the language became easier, although I still struggled.
So
struggled
like
to
you were thinking about it in English.
Initially, yes. Yeah. And then I had to just sort of say, okay, well, no, this is it doesn't mean this in English. They're not translating it into English. That's just what it is. And so I had to think of these words as just uh and I'm struggling to find an example, but um I just had to think about it as that's its identity essentially,
Mm,
and that's what I'm going to call it, rather than trying to retranslate everything.
yeah. So now so would you so as of today, would you consider yourself do you think you're fluent?
By the end of that year, I was very fluent, and I ended up going back to France for another year after my study abroad year. It's been now going on 14 years since I was in France, which is incredible to think about. And so I haven't used my language nearly as much as I wanted to. I try to keep up as I'm able to. And so I have a still a pretty good command of the language, but it's not as fluent, as smooth as it used to be, which makes me kind of sad because I love the language. I will always love the language. And I'm always looking for ways to um, get back up to date. I love to watch French movies. I've recently been looking for French podcasts. I recently joined TikTok, and so I've been following a couple of French pages so that I can get French news channels and practice my listening skills. Speaking skills are a more difficult thing to practice since there aren't many other French speakers around where I am.
Yeah, that's a weird thing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you go to one country that speaks French, right? And you're only there for like a year, and then you come back to your home country,
Mm-hmm.
which is America, and then you barely speak it, or
Right. You probably
you have
you
to
probably
look
had a
for
similar
places to
experience
speak
with
it.
Italian, I'm sure.
Right. I mean, honestly, I haven't really kept up with it, but
It's hard.
when I go to Italy, it's like, you have to speak it. Well, you could in like the metropolitan places, you can get away with, speaking English, but
Yeah.
on more of like the countryside, outskirts, suburbia, yeah, you have to speak it. But and then coming back to America, it's like you have to look for opportunities, to speak it,
Absolutely.
and you don't really, you know, you like you don't really, think to speak it.
Mhm. Right,
Yeah.
right.
So, so are you? So how, are you keeping up with? Well, you said you are keeping up with speaking French. So,
I try
uh,
to. It's difficult. I've been sort of lucky that I've lived in predominantly wine growing regions, and so where there is wine on the west coast of the U.S., there are generally French people who are coming to be winemakers. And so everywhere I've gone in the wine industry, there's been at least somebody who speaks French as a first language, and so I generally seek them out. But it's generally not consistent practice, which is unfortunate. So I use what I can. I have far more opportunities right now to practice my oral listening skills rather than my oral speaking skills, which again, that's too bad because I'd love to be able to practice both more.
yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
So let's start from the beginning. So
Sure.
why why French? Out of all the languages in the world, why French?
There was something about French that appealed to me. We had an older gentleman in my hometown that taught me how to count to 10 in both French and Spanish. And there was something I just found so interesting about the French. I was like, ooh, well, they use their nose and it sounds really pretty. And I don't really recall what it was. It was something about um, I felt very drawn to the language for whatever reason. Maybe it was the culture. There was almost sort of a fairy tale, like that's where, you know, Belle from Beauty and the Beast was, or something like that, that really drew me to that. There was something so fancy about it. And so there was also, I was always somebody who wanted to kind of do my own thing. And maybe sometimes in an impractical way. So where everybody in my high school, shouldn't say everybody, most people went and studied Spanish. I was like, I was going to be different and choose French, even though Spanish is far more useful around here. And I really wish that now that I spoke more of it. But there was something that just drew me to French. And from, I think, maybe even as early as seventh or eighth grade, I was trying to get my hands on French books to learn phrases or learn the different sounds. So something just kind of drew me to it.
Right. So it's like so you didn't want to follow the norm, right? You didn't want to follow the crowd.
Right. I always want to do my own thing and, follow, what is that phrase? Follow the beat of my own drummer. That's that's always how I've operated, and somehow it just manifested in wanting to study a different language than everybody else. Had I been given, at my school we only had the two options, French and Spanish. Had we been given the option of Italian or German or something, I probably would have taken those too. And
As
I
long as
ended up
it's
taking them in college because that was really fun.
so now, you said you majored in French.
I did, yes. My major changed a couple of times, just slightly nuanced. So I started out with a French studies major. I then switched to world languages with an emphasis on French. So I had sort of, I how do I started out with French, and then I sort of backed up. I wanted to zoom out almost because I was taking other languages. I thought, well, maybe this would be interesting if it showed more diversity in the languages that I'm taking. And so I wanted to sort of get credit for the other languages I was studying, but with French as the predominant focus. And then my advisor told me later on that that was actually seen as a, how do I want to say that, let me say that French studies was a stronger degree. And so if I showed my focus just in one area, that would be perceived better than the world languages with the emphasis on French. So I went back to the French studies degree, and that's what I ended up studying and ultimately majoring in. And I'm really glad that I did, because that was the goal from the beginning. Was I wanted to study French, and I wanted to just have this really uh, narrow focus on this one language. And so I'm glad I ultimately ended up with that as my major.
All right, so that's interesting how that worked out.
Mhm.
So your advisor, so you were taking a more general class on world languages.
Yeah, I took French, of course. I took German. I took Italian. I think that was it. Um, yeah, and so I wanted to sort of show that I was studying more than just French. But ultimately, I'm still glad that I narrowed in on the French focus.
And that's interesting, the fact that, in terms of, I guess I'm assuming it's your resume and how you look to other people, it looks better if you
Hmm.
focus on one language as opposed to
Right.
multiple languages.
Hmm. Yeah,
So it's
that was the
interesting
goal.
how that directed the course of your life.
Say that again.
I said that's interesting how that directed the course of your life.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So I went into college wanting to be a French professor. And so I knew that if that was the trajectory that I was going on, that were I to go on to a program and study, I was really interested in studying comparative literature and focusing on literature in other languages. So I would have had to have chosen, I think, two or three languages to use for a comparative literature degree, which I thought was a degree tailored just for me. I was like, I love languages, I love literature, and ultimately, that's not the way that my life went, and that's okay. I was so interested in the literature that I studied in college. Studied a lot of Franco-Caribbean culture, Franco-African literature, and it was helpful in other ways for sure. And I I am so glad that I was able to get that experience in college.
Isn't college beautiful?
It really is. It really is. For all of its, stress and obviously the expense of it all, it's such an experience I'm incredibly grateful for.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you. Thank God for college, right? All right. So I know I'm kind of jumping around, but
Sure.
you, what's it like being in a different country? Because you were there for a whole year. So,
Yeah.
did you, I'll put it like that. So, what did you learn about the French culture? that's different from American culture?
Yeah. So before I even went, I had somebody, I don't remember who it was. Somebody compared Americans to peaches and the French to coconuts. And I was like, well, what is that supposed to mean? And the idea was that here in the US, we have this sort of soft, fuzzy exterior. We're very friendly and welcoming on the outside, but it's almost a superficial exterior. And then we have this tough pit in the middle that like nobody can get to. And I always thought that was really interesting that almost we're perceived as this culture that you can only get so far with a person, right? You can only get to know them so much. And then the French, they said, were like coconuts, where they have this hard, tough exterior. But once you get into it, you're in. And in many ways, I found that to be true. I had a lot of people in both of my years in France where that were very welcoming, very accommodating, and then there is sort of this stereotype almost of the um, we often think of them as the rude French, like particularly in Paris, and I hear that from people who go to visit a lot, and I found that not to be true. They just they're very loyal to their people, you know, to the people that are in their inner circle, whoever that is. But they don't let everybody in. They're not, you know, they'll be welcoming, they'll be accommodating, but they really want to get to know somebody. And I really found that once you get into that inner circle, um, you're part of their group, and they're very uh, soft and fuzzy once you get to know them.
So how do you do that? How do you crack that hard shell?
Time. A lot of time. You know, and I had the advantage of living with host families, and so they were very welcoming to me and getting to know their daily routines, their daily schedules. That was very helpful. And but with everyday people, it was a little more difficult. I think that's part of the reason why the other students from Oregon and I tended to bond together, rather than there weren't many of us who ventured out to get to know French students at this school because they just seemed kind of, you know, put off, and almost like they didn't want to take the time to get to know us. However, we were able to make friends from other countries because we were all in the same program. We spent a lot of time together, and so I still have friends from Sweden, from Syria, from Ireland, that I talk to, and I really appreciate those connections. Um, but yeah, it was a challenge on the whole, outside of my host families, to meet a lot of French people and get to know them.
So let's talk more about that.
Yeah,
Because you, so was that your only option, staying with the family, or did you like, was there a dormitory at your school?
great question. So we actually had a few options. So at the very beginning of the year, we did um, there were, what did I say, about 20 of us from Oregon, and we all, for the first 3 weeks of our time there, were with host families, and that was our chance to really get in touch with the language, with the culture, and sort of feel acclimated. And so I stayed with a family for that first 3 weeks. At the end of the 3 weeks, we had the option of staying with the same host families if it was okay with them, or going and getting our own apartments. My I was very fortunate that my first host family chose to invite me to stay for the remainder of the semester, and I was very thankful for that. So I ended up staying with them through December. And then at the end of December, we were again given the option of having our own apartments or going to live with another host family. Most of the folks that I studied with chose to get their own apartments. I was 20 and not really prepared to live on my own. I also worried that if I were to live in an apartment by myself, that I wouldn't be speaking French as often. So I really wanted the experience of being able to use the language as much as I could during that year. And so I think I was the only one Uh, I don't recall, but I think I was the only one that chose to go live with another family. And so I stayed with a second host family for the remainder of the year. And that was a good experience. I'm glad that I was able to do that. Because then, like I said, I was able to have a they lived in a beautiful home, so that was really fun, and it was right in the downtown area, so it was perfect location. And I was able to use my language more and then get to know more French people.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Because I also stayed with a host family as well while I was in Italy, but my school was a little different in that you could either it's like a dormitory, a host
Mm.
family, or finding your own apartment.
Mm-hmm.
So I chose a family as well because I also wanted to like, okay, I really want to speak Italian and
Right.
I really want to get into it. So the way your school works is it's like the only options was host family or apartment.
Right. There weren't any dorms for that year. When I went back, I ended up working at a high school, and there was a dorm option at that time, which was kind of strange because I was the teaching assistant living in a dorm, but it worked out.
Awesome, awesome. So you had two different families,
Yeah,
host families, and you have two different experiences.
I
So
did.
could you talk about it?
Yes, my first host family was um, made up of a mom, a dad, brother, and a sister, and they were. I mean, immediately I felt very welcomed by them. They were a very warm family. They were friends with another family down the street, where one of the other gals from Oregon was staying. And so the two families would get together and we'd play games, we'd have dinners together. It really was a great experience. My host father was an architect in town. My host mother was a math teacher at a high school. Um, and so they just were a really down to earth family. I really enjoyed my time with them. Looking back, there's so much I would probably do differently because I was an awkward 20-year-old getting to know who I was on my own. And it was hard for me to come out of my shell a little bit, but I really enjoyed my time with them. My second family was a little different. There was mom who was a widow. She was a little bit older than my other host family. She was very formal, very serious, a little on the strict side. There was a sister and then a younger brother who was 9, and then the older sister was about, I think she was 16 or 17. And they lived in this, like I said, this beautiful old home that really looked kind of like a museum to me. And uh, that was a very different family because um, she wasn't as warm as welcoming. She was more of a typical French woman. They came from old aristocracy, and so there really was more of a formality to that family. And so I felt a little less close to them, although um, the rules were pretty strict. I had to come in at a certain time, and I had to watch my water usage, which isn't really something that we think about in the U.S. But over there, their utilities are just very expensive, and so I was frequently reminded about my usage of electricity and water, and that was a lot of kind of a shock to me. And there were things that were off limits, like the washing machine was off limits to me, so I had to um, sort of prearrange that schedule with my host mother. So overall, I was glad to be there and to be able to use the language. And there were just some things that I wasn't used to that were a little bit different from the first family and from my experience here in the U.S.
So the first family you had more of a warm, welcoming experience, and then the second family was more distant.
It was a little more distant, a little more not cold per se, but just I mean, distant really is the best word to capture it. And so I didn't feel quite as integrated into the family. I definitely felt sort of othered.
Mm. Were you like weirded out, or were there like, because I imagine like living with strangers, some people may, like do weird. Well, I don't know how much you can really share, but were you ever like concerned for your safety
Oh
or?
no, no, no,
Okay.
no, nothing like that. I think I really felt in that family. I felt a little bit more like a renter. They actually had somebody else who was renting a room on my same floor, and so she was a gal, probably about my age, also doing studies. And so she was a French gal, and she was renting a room, and so I felt very similar to her, in that I sort of felt like. Um, I was just renting a room from them, and they were occasionally cooking for me.
So you had some kind of camaraderie there.
I did. Yeah, I really enjoyed the other renter. I ended up actually going to visit her family's home in the north of France. So I got some travel experience going up there, and seeing some World War I, World War II locations. It was very interesting. So I really appreciated her. She kind of helped me through the semester, and obviously it was nice to be able to speak French with her too.
Another opportunity to speak French.
Indeed.
So now, so being in another country, there was, I had the talk, right, about, what to do, what not to do, and people will just stare at you, and did anyone ever do that to you, like whether it was a professor or a principal, well, not principal, what are they called, a dean, or just anybody, because I like all, like my school, like they huddled all the students together and was like, okay, this is the do's and don'ts, and
Hmm.
so the be aware of your surroundings talk, right?
Yeah.
So did you have that talk?
That's a good question, and I don't actually recall. If I imagine that we must have had something. We had an orientation meeting before we left, but I don't recall. I think we probably went over some general cultural issues, some things to be aware of, but we were in a smaller town, so safety was less of a concern. We were in our town was about 120,000 people, which is pretty small for a French city. They tend to be quite larger, and but I don't recall. I do remember having the strange feeling of you know these people sort of they we look similarly, right? We have light skin, I have brown hair, and so for all intents and purposes I sort of look like them on the exterior, but I dress differently and I sound differently and my mind works differently than theirs. And so I had this sort of strange feeling of these people look like me, but they're really different from me. And that was sort of a strange moment. I felt like in some way I sort of fit in. If I if I didn't open my mouth, I could almost get away with being confused for a local. But then I spoke with an accent, and they generally didn't think that I was from the US. Often people thought that I was, um, my family heritage is Polish. And so they would say, oh, that makes sense. You do look Polish. Or they would say, are you British or German? I got that a lot too. But very rarely did they ask if I was American. Um, but that said, I was able to blend in without feeling really like them, if that makes sense.
Well, was there any concern with, being a woman, any concern about like don't walk by yourself, or you know was there any like, I don't know how to put it in words, but
No,
did
I
you have
get,
any
yeah.
fears about, being a woman, you know?
Not particularly. I actually, both years that I lived in France, I felt very safe. My second year, I was in the south of France, and I was advised early on in the year to wear a ring on my wedding finger, to sort of keep men at a distance. And with the idea, this person told me, they may not respect you as a woman, but they'll respect the man behind you, so to speak. And so for a while I wore a ring, but it didn't particularly bother me, and I wasn't particularly bothered by anybody. um, I felt very safe in France the years that I was there. And there's something else I was going to say, I don't remember. Derailed my own thought. Um, but my friends and I did a lot of traveling. I did a lot of traveling, mostly in groups, but I did some by myself. And I wonder if it would be different, but I never really had a problem when I was over there, which was great. I'm glad for that.
Oh, well, you're lucky. You're very
I
lucky.
guess so. Yeah.
So
Uh,
no, what about like pickpockets or, like don't walk with your valuables or something like anything like that?
Right. Well, anytime I went to a big city, I was mindful of that. And Paris, of course, is notorious for pickpockets. So whenever I went to Paris, there was sort of, I learned over the course of the year, and then the second year that I was there, um, I was like, well, what are the French people doing? They're not
Mhm.
getting pickpocketed. What's different about them? And I noticed that I started watching the differences. Tourists would sort of have this aimless sort of do 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 kind of look about them as they were going around town. They they sort of felt sloppy, and that's the only word that's coming to my mind. And like they were trying too hard. They really stood out. You can tell a tourist by their shoes. Uh, Especially a tourist from the U.S. They've got these like white sneakers on, and that's just a no. Uh, but I was watching the French, and they have their purses slung over their shoulder, but they have this closed off, "Do not mess with me" look on their face, and they had their mind on a mission, and they were going to wherever they were going. And so I thought, if I adopt that attitude, I'll probably be fine. And so that's what I did. I had my purse slung over my shoulder. I never encountered any problems, because if somebody got close to me, I just gave them a look. And was firm, and got to wherever I was going, and that seemed to do the trick. uh, so yeah, I did. And of course I was living in a small town where really the crime rate wasn't a concern, pickpockets weren't a concern. uh, and so I got very lucky in that sense too.
Right. So you adapted,
Hmm.
you observed the locals and
Correct.
what they did, right?
Hmm.
And you did what they did. You
Hmm.
adapted to survive, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right, let's see. What else do I want to ask you? All right, so let's start to wind things down.
Okay.
So, would you? So I did want to. So actually, one more thing. So the
Oh
school
yeah.
that you went to, was it a different school from your school in America, or was it all the same school but a different campus? So mine was the same school but a different campus.
Right, right. Um, Ours was a completely different school. They weren't necessarily affiliated. I went with a program, so several of the large universities in Oregon were together uh, in a program called the Oregon University System, OUS. And so OUS was affiliated with um, two or three schools in France. And so we got our choice of any of those campuses. All of us that particular year chose the same city, Poitiers, and that was a very common choice for a lot of people to go to. It's an international school. It's a really small town, but the program itself had a lot to offer. The other program or the other schools in France, I don't believe offered the opportunity to be in host families. And so this was a nice way to be able to really get the full experience, which is probably why most people chose Poitiers.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right, now we're gonna start to wind things down
Okay.
now. So now, do you have any words of wisdom that you like to share with our audience? Any
Sure.
advice that you want to give?
Yeah, I actually, this relates to my time in France, particularly the first year that I was there. I came away with the big lesson that I learned was there is always an exception, and I learned that with people. I tended to do a lot more generalizing, a lot more stereotyping before I went to France. And I learned in my year there, there's always something that's going to be different and to look for those exceptions. And I've noticed that since my time abroad, I've gone on to become a psychologist. And I've found that that is really true, that there's always an exception with people. If we tend to clump people together, there's always going to be somebody who's going to be different, and that their opinions matter, their lives matter, their dreams and goals matter. And, we can't, it's really unfair to people um, to clump them all in one group or make assumptions. And so that was kind of my big takeaway from my time in France, is that, to look for those exceptions, because there always is one.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, any advice about anyone who wants to study abroad or anyone who's thinking about it?
Just do it. Just do it. Just do it. The big thing for me was, yeah, I didn't come from a wealthy family, and so I worried about financially how we would make it work. And uh I still have a lot of debt from that year, but it's worth it. It was so worth it. And even if I pay for it for the rest of my life, it's worth it. And I just, if you have the opportunity to go study abroad, to go live in another culture, um, absolutely take it, because it is worth so much. You'll learn more about yourself than you ever thought that you could, and the good, the bad, and the ugly about yourself. And it's an experience you really couldn't pay enough for. It's I'm so thankful. I want to go back to France so bad. Like I said, it's been almost 14 years, and I can't wait to go back. It feels like I miss part of my home.
Oh,
Yeah.
so it's like, I mean, you've been there for a year, right? So it's sort of like you've gotten used to it, and it's because I kind of had a similar experience where you get so used. I mean, I was only in Italy for like 3 months, but
Mhm.
you get so used to it, and then all of a sudden you have to come back home, and then
Right.
it's like if you're disoriented in a way.
Yeah, yeah. And so I miss it a lot.
Awesome. I totally get it. Totally understandable. So let me just pose this one last wisdom
Sure.
question. So now, what what if you could go? What would you tell yourself? What did you wish you knew? What how do I phrase it? So, what was something that you wish you knew before you before you went to France to study?
Oh, that's such a good question. Something I wish I knew. Um, I think probably just how flexible I had to be, and how I wasn't prepared enough for how quickly I'd have to sort of shift gears. And, like I was talking about earlier, making the observations, the things that I thought I knew, um, turned out to be a little bit different once I got there. And so I had to sort of think quickly and be willing to shift and be flexible. The people who around me that were less able to do that had a harder time fitting into the culture. They had a more difficult time being there. And it, I think they probably had a less enjoyable experience. Whereas if you just kind of almost give in to what you're experiencing, um, there's sort of a freedom in that. You can see how people live, and you'll have a better experience yourself.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right. Well, Sarah, thank you so much
Yeah,
for having this conversation with me and getting
yeah,
to know
thanks for having
me. Thank
me.
you for sharing your experience. So let's jump to your promo.
Yeah.
All right, you guys. So you can find Sarah on social media. So she has a Facebook group. It's a private Facebook group. So you'll have to request to join.
Hmm.
It's super secret. So it's called the Behind the Walls podcast. So I encourage you to reach out to Sarah. I guess we should have included your email. Um, but do you want to? What's your email? Let's see if we can add that real quick.
You can reach me at behindthewallspodcast@gmail.com.
All one word.
All one word.
All right, give me a second, guys. I'm just
There.
gonna put this in here. Okay, so beyond, no, behind,
Behind the Walls podcast. Yes, at
behind the
Gmail.
walls podcast at gmail.com. All right, I'm just gonna put that in your banner.
Perfect. Thank
All right,
you.
beautiful. All right, so I just included her email. All right, so again, join her private super secret Facebook. You would have to request to join. So I put her email in the scrolling marquee below for those of you who are watching on video. It will also be provided in the description for my audio people. But yes, so the group is called Behind the Walls Podcast. So send her an email.
Hmm.
The email is behind the walls podcast at gmail.com. So reach out
Indeed.
to her to sign up to join her Facebook group. So I encourage you to do that.
Absolutely.
She also has two Instagram accounts. So the first one is Leanie Lou Who,
Hmm.
and the second one is Behind the Walls Pod. So I encourage you to follow her on both of her Instagram accounts. And she also has a TikTok. It is Dr. Sarah Hyleen. Am I
Hmm.
reading that right?
Dr.
Okay.
Sarah Eileen.
Dr. Sarah Eileen, right? So follow her on TikTok as well. And of course, the email address again is behind the walls podcast at gmail.com. So I encourage you to follow her on social media. Social media is our lives now.
Oh yeah.
So I encourage you to follow her on social media. Again, she has the Facebook group, the super secret private group. She also has two Instagram accounts, Leanie Luhu and Behind the Walls Pod. And she also has a TikTok account, Dr. Sarah Eileen. And you can reach out to her via email, behind the walls podcast at gmail.com. So that information, of course, is scrolling below the bottom of the screen for
Yay.
my video people. For my audio people, I did not forget about you. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Stitcher or Spotify, read the description. All of this stuff is in the description. So one way or another, this information is accessible to you. So I encourage you to follow her on all of her accounts and reach out to her via email to get in the super secret group, but also to just learn more about her and to pick her brain. All right. And she has a podcast herself. She is a fellow podcaster like myself.
Yay.
Her podcast is called Behind the Walls of the World's Psychiatric Hospitals. And let me just tell you what it's about. So, on her podcast, you can learn about the history and treatments of now defunct asylums and hear the stories about the people who lived and worked there. So on the show, they explore some of the legends, the lore, the spooky ooky stories that live
Mhm.
on. It is playing, you can listen to it every Monday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your podcasts. I encourage
Indeed.
you to search for that podcast. It is called Behind the Walls of the World Psychiatric Hospitals. Sarah, is there anything else you want to share about your podcast?
Not too much. That almost covers it. I'm, like I said, I'm a psychologist. I've always been interested in the old psychiatric asylums and the treatment of the people there, and so we do like an in-depth look into the people who live there, what their lives were like at the hospital. I tell a little bit about the history of mental health treatment in the U.S. and the things they got right and the things they got wrong and the things they got very wrong.
All right, there it is. So, if that's your cup of tea, I encourage you to listen to her podcast. You can find it wherever there are podcasts. And
Mm-hmm.
once again, it is called Behind the Walls of the World Psychiatric Hospitals. So check out her podcast, you guys, and subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe. All right, Sarah, thank you again
Thank you.
for joining me today. This was awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gabrielle. This was great. Appreciate it.
Of course, of course. All right, let me place you backstage now. And it is now you and me, guys. Okay, so you guys, we have reached the conclusion of yet another episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. So I have gained a lot of from talking to Sarah, and I hope you guys did too, right? Especially those if you're looking to study abroad, to study in another country. I personally recommend that you just do it. Just go for it, and and step out of your comfort zone. So I definitely encourage you guys to study abroad. But all right, so let's get to the closing here, the nitty gritty of it all. So as a reminder, Hot Topics is a production of my company, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So, if you are looking for tutoring services, whether it's for yourself or for your child or for your neighbor or your friend, reach out to us. Our website is www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. You can also email us at success@astepaheadtutoringservices.com. You can call or text us at 347-762-2838. You can also find us on multiple social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, WhatsApp, and Eventbrite. So, I also encourage you to follow us there as well. So you can find us on multiple social media platforms and reach out to us there as well. And we provide a variety of tutoring services. So we do one-on-one tutoring, test prep, college counseling, so maybe if you're looking to, maybe you want to study abroad, or maybe your child wants to study abroad and you need some advice, you need some guidance, reach out to us. We could do that as well. We can provide guidance on that as well as part of our college counseling services if you're particularly interested in the study abroad program. So feel free to reach out to us that way as well. So if you are looking for any of these services, you're struggling, homework help, any kind of academic difficulties, reach out to us. Again, I will provide our website, www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. Of course, it's at the bottom of your screen. If you're watching this on video, if you're listening to this on audio, all of this stuff is in the description. So either way, this information is accessible to you. I also encourage you to leave us your feedback. Let us know what you thought about today's episode. If you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook or any kind of video platform, drop a comment. Drop a comment in the comment section. Let us know your thoughts about this episode that you just partook in. And if you are listening to this on Apple or Spotify or Stitcher or any kind of podcast listening platform, drop a rating. Drop a rating, drop a note. However you are taking in the sound of my voice right now, let us know your feedback. I definitely want to know your feedback about the episode, this episode for today. So I encourage you to drop your feedback as well. All right, you guys. Oh, let me just scratch my head there or my eye. Well, anyway, so thank you guys again for joining us on Hot Topics. I look forward to you joining us at the next episode. Thank you guys so much. And, it's been we're still going. Hot Topics is still here and we're still going. So thank you guys for joining us. And now I am now signing off. Bye, you guys.